It was a peaceful Saturday morning when the sound of sirens shattered the calm. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence as two patrol cars pulled up in front of Jake and Lisa's home, their flashing lights reflecting off the windows. From the porch, Lisa stood frozen, holding a coffee mug mid-sip, her brain struggling to comprehend what was happening. Jake, who had just stepped outside to water the plants, blinked in disbelief as two uniformed officers stepped out of their car, their hands resting near their holsters. And then, like a scene straight out of a bad reality show, Karen burst onto the sidewalk, waving her arms dramatically. "There they are, officer. That's them. They're trespassing on private property," she screeched, pointing an accusing finger at Jake and Lisa's house, their house. The officers exchanged a glance before approaching, their eyes scanning the couple as if expecting a real crime in progress. Jake slowly put down the hose, shaking his head with a chuckle. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. But Karen wasn't done. "They threatened me," she wailed, suddenly clutching her chest like a bad soap opera actress. "They said they would destroy my home if I didn't leave them alone." Lisa's mouth fell open. "What?" she sputtered, nearly dropping her coffee. That's when Karen went for the final, outrageous touch, tears. Big, fake crocodile tears as she sobbed dramatically. "I was just trying to enforce community rules, and now they want to hurt me," she wailed. "They're dangerous squatters." The officers turned to Jake and Lisa, expecting an explanation, but Lisa simply pulled out her phone, a knowing smirk creeping onto her lips. "You might want to hear the 911 call," she said. "Because this is about to be the biggest waste of your time." It had started just 2 weeks ago when Jake and Lisa moved into what they thought would be their dream home. The house was perfect, spacious backyard, friendly neighbors, and a quiet street. That illusion was shattered the moment Karen arrived on their doorstep, clipboard in hand, a tight smile stretching across her face. "I see we have new residents," she said in a tone that wasn't quite welcoming, more like an interrogation. "I'm Karen, head of the HOA." Jake and Lisa, still exhausted from unpacking, exchanged glances before smiling politely. "Nice to meet you," Jake said. "We're just getting settled in." Karen's eyes flicked toward their porch, and immediately, her lips pursed. Well, we have rules here. And your welcome mat isn't HOA approved?" Lisa blinked. "Our mat?" she asked, glancing at the harmless live, laugh, love mat on the ground. "That's right," Karen sniffed. "It's not neutral colored, and we have a strict aesthetic guideline to follow." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "I'll let this slide for now, but you'll need to replace it immediately." Lisa forced a smile. "Sure. We'll look into that." She shut the door before her frustration could explode. But that was only the beginning. Over the next few days, Karen made it her mission to patrol their house like a self-appointed warden. One morning, Lisa stepped outside and nearly tripped over a bright red violation notice taped to their door. "What the hell?" she muttered, peeling it off. Unauthorized car parked in the driveway. Her eyes darted toward their sedan, sitting perfectly within their own property line. Lisa stormed over to Karen, who was standing across the street with arms crossed. "Karen, why did we get a notice for our own car?" Karen sniffed. "Because cars aren't allowed to be parked outside for extended periods." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Extended periods? It's been there for 10 minutes. Karen gave a saccharine smile. "Rules are rules." It only got worse. Karen started measuring their grass height with a literal ruler. One night, Jake caught her snooping around their backyard, muttering about property lines. When they confronted her, she scoffed. "It's my duty to ensure everyone follows the guidelines." But the final straw came when Lisa caught Karen trying to tow their car, while they were home. The tow truck driver looked just as confused as Lisa. Ma'am, do you even have authority over this lot?" he asked Karen. Karen scoffed. "I'm head of the HOA, and they're breaking multiple violations." Lisa folded her arms. "No, Karen. You say you're head of the HOA, but we checked. You're not even on the board." Karen's face twitched, but before she could respond, Lisa added, "And I swear, if you try to pull something like this again, I will take legal action." Karen huffed, turned on her heel, and stormed off. That should have been the end of it. Instead, Karen escalated. And that's what led to her boldest stunt yet, calling 911 to report Jake and Lisa as trespassers. When the officers listened to the 911 recording, the sheer absurdity was evident. "Ma'am," the dispatcher's voice crackled from Lisa's phone, "are you saying they broke into the house?" "Yes. They've been illegally living there for weeks." Karen's voice shrieked through the audio. "They're aggressive and dangerous. And the woman threatened me with—" A pause, then in a lower voice, she muttered, "A weapon." The officers gave Karen a deadpan look. "A weapon?" one asked. "Yes. A dangerous object," Karen stammered. "What object?" The officer's eyebrow lifted. Karen hesitated before pointing dramatically. "That hose. She was waving it at me." The silence was deafening. Jake snorted. The officer rubbed his temples. "A garden hose?" he repeated, looking unimpressed. "Yes. It was a threat," Karen insisted. One of the neighbors, who had been quietly observing from across the street, burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Karen, you've really outdone yourself this time." The lead officer turned to Jake and Lisa. "Can you prove ownership of the house?" Jake sighed, pulled out his phone, and scrolled to the deed's digital copy. "Here you go, officer. The house is ours. We moved in 2 weeks ago." The officer studied the document, then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, they own this property." Karen's face blanched, but she quickly recovered. "I was misinformed. I was just doing my duty to the community." Lisa smirked. "Misinformed, huh? So you didn't just make this whole thing up?" Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. The neighbors were all watching now, some shaking their heads, others filming the whole disaster. Then, the officer's radio crackled, and a voice came through. "Dispatch confirming no known violations or trespassing reports in that area. Homeowners are legal residents." The officer's eyes darkened as he clipped the radio back onto his vest. "Ma'am, you called 911 under false pretenses." Karen gasped. No, I just..." The officer shook his head. "Filing a false report is a serious offense." Lisa, grinning ear to ear, leaned over and whispered to Karen, "You should have just let us keep the damn welcome mat." The moment the officer informed Karen that filing a false report was a serious offense, her expression went through a rapid transformation. The dramatic tears disappeared, replaced by wide, darting eyes and a panicked stammer. She threw up her hands, shaking her head furiously. Wait. I didn't mean to file a false report. I was just trying to protect the community," she blurted, her voice climbing in desperation. But the officers weren't buying it. The lead cop, Officer Daniels, folded his arms and stared at her, unimpressed. "Ma'am, you called 911, knowingly made a false statement, and wasted emergency resources over a personal dispute. That's not community protection. That's obstruction." Karen's mouth flapped open like a fish gasping for air. She spun around to the crowd of neighbors that had gathered, searching for an ally, but all she got were amused smirks and skeptical stares. Lisa leaned against Jake, crossing her arms with a smug expression. "So, what happens now, officer?" she asked casually, though the glee in her tone was unmistakable. Karen, sensing she was cornered, suddenly tried a new tactic, playing the victim. "This is harassment," she shrieked, turning back to the officers. "They've been targeting me since they moved in. Look at them, smirking like they think this is funny. I'm an elderly woman, and they're making me feel unsafe in my own neighborhood." Jake burst out laughing. "Elderly?" he repeated. "Karen, you're what, in your mid-50s? Relax." The crowd erupted into chuckles. Karen, realizing her attempt at sympathy wasn't working, took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders, trying to regain her composure. "Fine," she huffed. "You want proof that I was doing my duty? I have it." She whipped out her phone and started scrolling aggressively. I have emails, I have complaints, I have evidence. She finally found what she was looking for and shoved the phone toward Officer Daniels. He took it and squinted at the screen. The neighbors leaned in slightly, curious about what Karen thought was her golden ticket. A few seconds later, the officer sighed and rubbed his temples. "Ma'am, this is an email thread you started with yourself?" A stunned silence followed. Jake blinked. Lisa choked back a laugh. The neighbors exchanged glances. Karen snatched her phone back, huffing. "It's a record of concerns. That's still valid documentation." At that moment, the real HOA president, Mr. Donnelly, arrived on the scene, looking equal parts exhausted and irritated. He was an older gentleman with salt and pepper hair and an ever-present clipboard. "What in the world is going on here?" he demanded, looking at the police cars and the crowd of neighbors. Karen straightened up like a soldier at attention. "Mr. Donnelly, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice dripping with fake relief. "These people, these criminals, have been violating every single HOA regulation we have. I've had to enforce the rules myself since nobody else seems willing to do their job." Mr. Donnelly stared at her blankly. Then, in the flattest tone imaginable, he said, "Karen, you are not on the HOA board." The words hit like a slap across the face. Karen's mouth fell open, but before she could deny it, he continued, "You were removed from any volunteer position 3 years ago for excessive complaints, unauthorized fines, and harassing other residents." A murmur of agreement ran through the gathered crowd. Todd, one of the longtime residents, spoke up, shaking his head. "Yeah, she tried to fine me $500 for putting out my trash cans a day early. I checked with the real HOA, and turns out she made the whole thing up." Lisa gasped dramatically, placing a hand over her heart. "You mean Karen has no authority? All those violations were fake." She turned to Jake with wide, playful eyes. "Honey, can you believe it?" Jake smirked. "You know, I had my suspicions when she tried to fine us for our car's offensive color." The crowd burst into laughter again, while Karen's face burned red. Realizing she was losing ground fast, Karen tried to regain control of the situation. "Well, maybe I wasn't officially on the board, but someone has to enforce the rules," she snapped. "This neighborhood is going downhill because of people like them, bringing in their—" She paused, realizing she was dangerously close to saying something that would make things even worse for her. But the damage was already done. The mood shifted. The laughter faded. The neighbors who had been entertained by the spectacle now looked at her with clear disapproval. Mr. Donnelly cleared his throat. "Karen, you have no authority. You've been impersonating an HOA official, issuing fake fines, and now calling 911 with false reports. This is not just a nuisance, it's fraud." Karen's lips trembled. "Fraud?" she echoed, suddenly looking much less confident. Officer Daniels nodded. "Yes, ma'am. And you've also wasted law enforcement resources. That's a serious issue." Karen's breath quickened. Wait, I can fix this," she said desperately, looking between the officers and Mr. Donnelly. "We can just forget this happened, right?" "I was misinformed." Lisa snorted. "Yeah, misinformed by your own emails to yourself." Another wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone, to back her up, but she found nothing but smirks and disapproval. Then came the final blow. One of the newer neighbors, a woman named Rachel, stepped forward, holding up her phone. I was doing some digging while this mess was happening. Turns out Karen's been charging people fake HOA fees for years." The crowd erupted in shocked gasp. Even Mr. Donnelly's eyes widened. "Wait, what?" Rachel turned her phone around, showing a thread of messages from Karen to various residents demanding payments for neighborhood upkeep and penalty fees. "She told me I had to Venmo her $200 when I first moved in," Rachel continued, looking disgusted. "She said it was a mandatory neighborhood improvement fee." Mr. Donnelly's face darkened. "Karen, is this true?" Karen's entire body had gone stiff. Her lips were pressed together, and her eyes darted wildly. That's not, I was just, she took a shaky breath. I was helping. The lead officer let out a sigh. All right, that's enough, he said. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us. The moment the words left his mouth, Karen lost it. No. You can't arrest me. I did nothing wrong, she screeched. She turned to the crowd, arms flailing. Are you all seriously just going to stand there and let them treat me like this? After everything I've done for this neighborhood? Silence. The same neighbors she had terrorized for years stood watching, their arms crossed, their faces unimpressed. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice spoke up. Goodbye, Karen. It was Todd. The neighbors erupted into applause. Karen's face twisted in fury. You'll regret this. All of you, she screamed as the officers gently but firmly guided her toward the patrol car. This neighborhood needs me. Lisa called out, Don't worry, Karen. We'll keep your fake HOA alive in spirit. As the car doors shut and the police drove off, the neighborhood let out a collective sigh of relief. Mr. Donnelly rubbed his temples. I need a drink, he muttered. Jake chuckled, throwing an arm around Lisa. Well, the neighborhood buzzed with an electric energy as Karen was driven away, the flashing lights of the patrol car fading into the distance. People lingered outside, murmuring excitedly, laughing, and shaking their heads in disbelief. It wasn't every day that the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA was exposed for the fraud she was, and certainly not in such a spectacular fashion. Lisa stood beside Jake, watching the commotion die down, a smirk playing on her lips. Well, that was something, she said, still replaying the moment Karen tried to argue that a garden hose was a deadly weapon. Jake chuckled. Honestly, I thought she'd at least make it a few months before getting arrested. But nope, she went full Karen in record time. Lisa sighed in contentment. I almost wish we had popcorn. As the neighbors began dispersing, Mr. Donnelly stayed behind, shaking his head. I knew Karen was a handful, but this is a whole new level of crazy. He sighed, rubbing his temples. I'll be filing an official complaint with the Real HOA board to make sure she never tries to pull anything like this again. Lisa grinned. You mean she's not going to get her very own Karen redemption arc, where she learns the error of her ways? Donnelly snorted. I think we both know she's more likely to fake an apology, pretend to be the victim, and then try to sell everyone mandatory HOA insurance or some nonsense. The next morning, life seemed to return to normal, or at least, what passed for normal in a neighborhood that had just collectively witnessed a police takedown over a fabricated trespassing claim. Lisa and Jake enjoyed their coffee on the porch, relishing the peace that came with knowing Karen wouldn't be lurking around their property with a clipboard. But the universe had other plans. Lisa's phone buzzed, and she glanced down to see a text from Rachel. You are not going to believe this, it read, followed by a link to a community Facebook post. With a sinking feeling, Lisa tapped the link. The post, written in all caps as if Karen had angrily typed it through gritted teeth, read, Hello, neighbors. It's unfortunate that certain individuals have spread lies about me, causing unnecessary drama and distress. I have been falsely accused and mistreated. But don't worry, I'm still here to protect our community from rule breakers and outsiders. We must not let this neighborhood fall into chaos. Also, please ignore any false reports about scam HOA fees. That was a simple misunderstanding. Lisa nearly choked on her coffee. Oh my God. She's already trying to make a comeback. Jake leaned over, reading the post. He let out a low whistle. She really doesn't know when to quit, does she? Lisa laughed, scrolling through the comments, which were absolutely savage. Look at this, she said, pointing to a comment from Todd. Karen, you got arrested on our street. You are the chaos. Another neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, had replied, Karen, sweetie, nobody wants your protection except maybe the squirrels you've been harassing for stepping on your lawn. Lisa burst out laughing. This is better than reality TV. That should have been the end of it, but because Karen was Karen, she wasn't going down without a fight. Later that afternoon, a notice appeared on everyone's doors. Lisa, already knowing who it had to be from, snatched it up and read aloud, "New Neighborhood Security Initiative. Protecting our community from unruly individuals. Hosted by your dedicated neighborhood leader, Karen." Lisa stared at the paper. How? She's banned from the HOA, she's under investigation for fraud, and she still thinks she can run things. Jake shook his head in amazement. She might be the most determined scam artist I've ever seen. Later that evening, the supposed neighborhood security meeting took place at the park, though it was really more of a one-woman monologue. Karen, standing in front of a small group of elderly residents who probably had no idea what was going on, gestured wildly as she spoke. "The real problem isn't me, it's outsiders ruining our way of life," she announced dramatically. "We must keep things in order. We must not let people like Lisa and Jake turn our neighborhood into a lawless wasteland." Lisa, standing in the back with Jake and Todd, whispered, "Did she just say lawless wasteland? Over a welcome mat?" Todd shook his head. "This is pure comedy." The best part came when the HOA president, Mr. Donnelly, arrived with official documents. "Karen," he called out, waving the papers, "as of now, you are legally prohibited from issuing any notices, running any meetings, or collecting any so-called fines. This is a legally binding cease and desist." The neighbors murmured in approval. Karen's mouth flapped open. "You can't do this to me," she shrieked. "This community needs me." "No," Donnelly said, shaking his head. "This community needs peace. And you, Karen, are the opposite of peace." The next morning, as Lisa and Jake were once again enjoying their porch coffee, a moving truck pulled up in front of Karen's house. Lisa squinted. "No way." Sure enough, Karen, looking red-faced and furious, stomped out of her house, barking orders at the movers. Todd, passing by on his morning jog, slowed down and grinned. "Guess she realized the neighborhood's not as fun when she can't terrorize everyone." Lisa grinned. "I give it a week before she pops up in another neighborhood, trying to take over a different HOA." As Karen's car disappeared down the street for the last time, Lisa took a deep breath, enjoying the crisp morning air. The street was quieter now, the atmosphere lighter. It was a satisfying end to an absolute roller coaster of a month. "So," Jake said, stretching, "now that the evil has been vanquished, what's next?" Lisa smirked. "Well, for starters, I'm getting the biggest, most colorful welcome mat I can find. And then? I think we throw a Karen-free neighborhood party." Jake grinned. "Now that sounds like a plan." A few weeks later, Lisa and Jake hosted the biggest block party the neighborhood had ever seen. Laughter filled the air, kids ran through the yards, and the atmosphere was one of pure celebration. At one point, Todd stood on a chair and raised his drink. "To a Karen-free neighborhood," he cheered, and the crowd echoed his sentiment, glasses clinking in agreement. Lisa beamed as she glanced around, taking in the happy faces of their community. No fake fines, no absurd violations, no unauthorized HOA drama. Just peace, laughter, and the comforting knowledge that the reign of Karen was finally over.